All right, buckle up, because today we're diving into a topic that's equal parts fascinating and, well, a little bit creepy. Poltergeists. Slamming doors, objects flying around, that whole spooky deal.
And it's more than just your typical bumps in the night.
Right, it's not just your run-of-the-mill haunted house stuff.
Exactly. What makes poltergeists so interesting is they really push the boundaries of what we think of as ghostly. It's not just whispers and cold spots. We're talking physical interactions, things actually moving, even reports of, believe it or not, violence directed at people.
Okay, yeah. Now that you mention it, even the term poltergeist, it does kind of sound a little, I don't know, almost too simple for what we're talking about.
It's a bit deceptive.
Yeah, isn't it just German for noisy ghost?
Yeah.
Which, that doesn't exactly send shivers down your spine, does it?
No, not quite the image, right? Noisy ghost really doesn't cut it when you look at the cases. I mean, think less Casper and more like aggressive roommate with telekinetic powers.
Okay, that's a much better way to put it.
You've got cases like Greyfriars Cemetery in Edinburgh. You know that one? People on ghost tours there have reported some really strange stuff. We're talking scratches, bruises, even people passing out, claiming something actually pushed them.
Wait, a whole cemetery?
Yeah.
So we're not just talking about a haunted house here. It's like a whole haunted graveyard. That's intense.
It's not just your average haunting, that's for sure.
So not just objects moving. We're talking actual physical harm. Okay, that definitely ups the creep factor.
Oh, absolutely. And that potential for harm, that's actually a recurring thing in a lot of poltergeist cases.
Right.
Yeah, take the Jaboticabal case in Brazil. This young girl, Maria, was tormented for years. Objects hurled across the room, unexplained scratches and bites, even needles ending up embedded in her skin. It went way beyond spooky. It was actually dangerous.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely giving me chills. And it kind of makes you wonder, why? What's the motive behind that level of aggression? One of the articles we dug into talked about a connection to past lives, like some kind of karmic thing.
Right, that idea of past lives and karmic debts does come up a lot in these discussions. Like
Yeah.
the Thornton Heath case, a family was tormented for, get this, 4 years. And some people who have looked into it, they suggest the haunting, if that's even what it wasn't random, it seemed purposeful, like whatever was behind it was trying to force them out.
Like it had an agenda, almost.
Yeah, almost like it was settling some kind of old score, which is a chilling thought when you really think about it.
That's seriously creepy. So we're talking vengeful spirits, is that it? Or could it be something else? Because, one thing I noticed while we were researching for this, it seems like a lot of these poltergeist cases, they seem to center around teenagers.
Interesting.
Yeah, and especially girls, now that I think about it. Is there something to that, you think?
That's a great observation, and it actually leads us to one of the most interesting theories about all of this, the psychological connection.
Okay, let's hear it.
So a lot of researchers have noticed this potential link between poltergeist activity and, like you said, periods of really intense emotional stuff, especially during adolescence.
So, like teenage angst. But instead of just, slamming doors, it's like actual doors slamming on their own. What's the thinking there? Just hormones gone wild or something?
Well, it's a little more complicated than just hormones, although I'm sure those don't help. The theory basically suggests that during times of heightened stress, emotional upheaval, particularly puberty, there might be a kind of psychic energy that's unconsciously released, and sometimes this energy, it could actually manifest as physical disturbances.
So it's like the emotional turmoil is finding an outlet, but instead of journaling or whatever, it's throwing furniture around with their minds.
It's kind of a way to think about it.
Okay, so not your average teenage mood swing then. Yeah, hold on though. Psychic energy, what does that even mean? Are we talking telekinesis and ESP here?
Well, that's where things get a little tricky. The term itself, psychic energy, it's a bit loaded. There's not really a universally accepted scientific, definition for it. It's more of a way to describe this idea that our minds, our emotions even, could potentially interact with the physical world in ways we don't fully get yet.
So we have this whole other level of power within us that we just haven't figured out how to access consciously. So maybe some of these kids aren't being haunted, they're accidentally tapping into something within themselves. Now, that's a fascinating thought, and that actually reminds me of one of the cases we talked about, the Indianapolis Poltergeist. Wasn't that the one with the teenage girl at the center of it all?
Yeah.
But then there was also that whole question of whether some of it was real or, maybe not totally adding up.
Yes, the Indianapolis case. It really shows you how tricky it can be to separate what's really going on, fact versus fiction, or even if you have something genuinely strange happening, how much of it is, shall we say, embellished.
Right, like blown out of proportion.
Exactly. There were definitely some weird things reported, but there were also inconsistencies, and they even accused the girl's mom of faking some of it. It really highlights why you've got to be careful, got to be a little skeptical, especially with something like Poltergeist, where it's so easy to get caught up in the spookiness of it all.
So how do you even go about trying to sort through all that? Like, how do you reconcile these crazy stories with, actual evidence? Because as interesting as the whole psychological thing is, it can't be the whole story, can it?
No, you're right. It can't explain everything, and that's where the science comes in. Because it turns out there are a lot of completely natural things that can look and sound an awful lot like what people call paranormal.
Okay, so you're saying there might be perfectly normal explanations for some of these haunted happenings. I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Yeah.
What are some of the top contenders for debunking the poltergeist myth?
Well, one of the most interesting ones is infrasound. Basically, it's sound waves, but they're too low for us to actually hear them. But even though we don't consciously hear them, they can still affect us.
Infrasound, yeah, that rings a bell. Isn't it the thing where, like, you might feel uneasy or even think you see something that isn't really there?
That's the one. It messes with your senses, basically. Think of it this way. Imagine a house, right? But it's built near a factory or something with these huge machines that are constantly humming. You might not hear them directly, but they create these super low frequency sound waves. That's the infrasound. And it can travel. So people living in the house, they start feeling anxious, seeing things out of the corner of their eyes, and suddenly you've got yourself a haunted house. But it's not ghosts, it's just physics.
Wow, that's actually pretty clever. Like, oh, the house isn't haunted, it just vibrates at a frequency that makes us see things. What else is there?
Well, there are electromagnetic fields, EMFs they're called. Changes in those fields, and they're all around us, can cause some pretty weird stuff. Lights flickering, appliances acting up, even that feeling like you get a static shock.
Right, and I bet people could easily mistake that kind of thing for a ghost messing with the lights or something.
Exactly. And then there's always good old-fashioned seismic activity, even really small tremors, the kind you don't even feel, really. They can make sounds, creaking, groaning, things like that. Maybe even make it look like objects are moving on their own.
So sometimes a creaky house is just a creaky house, or, maybe built on a fault line. But still, even with all that, some of these poltergeist stories, they're so strange, so specific. It's hard to imagine just infrasound or a wobbly foundation explaining all that.
I agree. There are definitely cases that are harder to explain away. Cases with these details that really make you wonder if maybe, just maybe, there's more to it than we realize. We have to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers.
It's like that saying, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. Which kind of brings us back to this idea of like the unknown, those unexplored possibilities within ourselves that we talked about earlier. It's like we've gone from ghost stories to like the edge of science fiction here.
It is fascinating, isn't it? We're really talking about the limits of what we know about the world, about consciousness, about ourselves even. What if instead of ghosts, we're really talking about something else? Like, what if it's untapped human potential we're seeing in these cases?
Okay, now you're really blowing my mind here. So you're saying like these poltergeist cases could actually be examples of what? Accidental telekinesis or some kind of psychic energy we don't understand.
I mean, it's a possibility.
Right.
Think about it. Influencing the physical world with your mind, actually making your thoughts and feelings have a real impact like that. It's the kind of thing you see in movies, but it's also something people have been talking about for centuries. Philosophers, mystics, you name it.
So like psychic powers, the collective unconscious, all that. I got to admit, part of me really wants to believe there's more to us, to everything really, than we realize.
And maybe there is. Even if we can explain away some of these cases, some of them really make you think twice. They challenge everything we think we know, make you wonder if maybe, just maybe, there are more things out there than we can even imagine.
Talk of food for thought, right? Well, this has been one wild ride. Creaky cases, psychology, we even touched on the limits of science.
And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Sparking that curiosity, making us question what we think we know, and maybe leaving us with a little more wonder about the mysteries we haven't solved yet.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And for everyone listening, if you want to dive into this a little deeper, we've got links to all the articles we talked about in the show notes. Read up on the cases, check out the different theories, and decide for yourself. Ghosts, natural phenomena, or something even weirder. Until next time, stay curious, everyone. And hey, maybe sleep with one eye open, just in case.